Good morning. Looks like we have a good crowd today. Glad you're here with us and here to worship. And today we're taking a little break from talking about what Jesus commands and getting to follow Jesus in that way. Obviously, we're not going to stop following him. But today we're going to another topic for just 1 week. We're talking about doing more together, about the importance of us working together as families, as a church, and how important those things are. Whenever we put God first and we work together in His name, we honor Him, and then we can do so much more. Today we go all the way back to the Old Testament to about 600 years before the time of Jesus, and go back to a time whenever life was very difficult for Israel. Matter of fact, because of Israel's sins, because Israel had forgotten the God they knew, Yahweh, because of those things, God had allowed them to be invaded, and most of the Israelites were taken out of Jerusalem, taken out of their land, and they were sent off into Babylonia. And so there in Babylonia, which today we might think of as Persia or Iran, in that part of the world, there God's people for the most part lived. Some had gone back into the land, back to Jerusalem, but we think about a difficult time, and God was using a man by the name of Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah was a cupbearer in a foreign country. He worked for Artaxerxes, who was the king of Persia or the king of Babylon. And being a cupbearer is a rather important job. Matter of fact, often it pays well. It is also a scary job because you are the one that tastes the food and tastes the drink before the king tastes it to make sure that whatever it is he's about to eat or drink is safe and doesn't have poison. And obviously he had been very loyal to the king and he had done his job. The king loves him because of what he's done, and he's done a wonderful job, although he's not in his homeland. He is serving a foreign king. Matter of fact, his homeland was 1,000 miles away. Imagine what it's like to live 1,000 miles from home. Some of you say, I don't live 1,000 miles from home. You may live 5,000 or 6,000 miles from home, or even farther, because this is obviously an international congregation and we have people from all over. Now, some of you are only 6 blocks from home, so I also know that you have a different thinking of this. But being far away from home can be a difficult thing. And for Nehemiah, as much as he loved working for Artaxerxes, he loved his homeland and wanted his homeland to be great. He desired his home capital city of Jerusalem to be safe and to be strong and to be what you would expect of your homeland and your home capital to be. Now, I want you to read in the Bible with me in Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, where Nehemiah gets some news that maybe he doesn't like. During the month of Chislev, now let me stop before I start here. For our translators, I apologize. There are some hard words today. It's okay. They're hard in every language, so I just want you to know that. So there you go. Nehemiah chapter 1, during the month of Chislev in the 20th year, when I was in the fortress city of Susa, Hananiah, one of my brothers, arrived with men from Judah. And I questioned them about Jerusalem and the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile. They said to me, the remnant in the province who survived the exile are in great trouble and disgrace. Jerusalem's wall has been broken down, and its gates have been burned. And when I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of heavens. Have you ever received news that made you sit down and weep? Maybe it was a letter when you were far off somewhere. Maybe it was an email, a phone call. Maybe it was at the doctor's office, wherever it may be. You know what that feels like. It is human experience that we have all had in one way or another. And here he is far away from home, and he hears this news. Tell me about Jerusalem. Tell me about the capital. And he's hoping probably to hear these great stories. Oh, it's booming. The economy is great. The people are wonderful. Oh, it's back to its splendor before the exile. But what he hears is the walls are down, and the gates are burned, which means that there have been foreign invaders, and it means that they are not protected anymore. They have lost their defense. And he sits down and he weeps. You see, bad news brought distress, but it did not bring despair. Sometimes we might have despair for 15 minutes or an hour or even a week, but for those of us who are in Christ, it should not bring despair. Despair is whenever I go, oh no, there is no hope, I give up. No, we don't go to that point, although we have distress. In almost every funeral service I do, or memorial service I do, I quote out of 1 Thessalonians. You remember when Paul is talking about death, and the Apostle Paul says, we don't grieve like those grieve who have no hope. We grieve differently because we have hope. When I am in despair, I have no hope. But even if I am facing death or facing the loss of a loved one that's in Christ, I know I have this incredible hope. I know what's on the other side. I don't exactly know what it looks like. I don't know how to picture it all, but what I know that there is incredible hope there. And so this is what happens to him. He has this bad news, and it's so terrible. Jerusalem's walls were destroyed, and the people are in poverty. And it's worse than maybe what he had imagined it to be. And if you figure up the days, Nehemiah prayed and fasted for 4 months. Have you ever felt that way before? Not that he literally fasted every day and didn't eat anything for 4 months. That would be nearly impossible, right? But what he is doing is fasting on and off, and he's in this sad mood, but he's praying to God to bring forth something great and better. Many years ago, when we were missionaries, actually in 1995, in that particular year, we were in Brazil, I got a call from one of our church members one morning in April, and he said, hey, I wanted you to know that there was a terrible explosion in Oklahoma City. Now, Oklahoma City was our base of support. That's where we had lived. We had gone to college. Our supporting church was there. All those things is where we had planned to go back to and did after our work in Brazil. And he says, there's been this terrible explosion, and there are people that are dead, lots of people. And I said to the man on the phone, our church member, I said, I think you probably mean New York City, because no one in those days especially knew of Oklahoma City. He said, no, I'm reading it right now on the screen. It says Oklahoma City. Well, in the next days and weeks, it was scary for everybody. I'm sure if you were living here or even in other places, you felt that. We all wondered what would happen next. It was at that point the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil ever. And you remember, if you were alive then, what that felt like. Some of you lived there in those days. It was so strange for us, at least I'll say speak for me, to live in another country when that happened in what felt like your home. Because it was like I'm stuck on the moon without a spaceship to get there. I can't go. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get there. How could I help people? And even if I got there, there wasn't anything I could do. But I wanted to be there. I wanted to see people and hug people and be with them because of what had happened. Even though I wasn't there, it was like I was going through it at the same time. You know what that feeling is like for those of you who have heard bad news from home when you are far away. The lesson, at least for this part, is don't give up. Don't be in despair. You are in distress, but you are not in despair. You don't give up because there is hope that comes. There is something better. We even lost one of our friends, one of our church members in that bombing. And I remember ministering with her husband after that in the days and literally years to come of what that was like, but the hope that was there to know that his wife was with Christ and how wonderful that was to at least have that hope that took away the distress. So Nehemiah is as sad as he can be. And so what Nehemiah does, Whenever he apparently is going into Artaxerxes and he would drink the drink or eat the food or whatever he would do, Artaxerxes could see on his face, what's wrong with you? You're different, Nehemiah. You're not as funny as you were before, or whatever he said. He didn't say that, but whatever it was, he says. And he says, my capital city, Jerusalem, which Artaxerxes would have known well because he's the one that went and got the people from there, it is lying in ruins. Matter of fact, they had built the temple back. It was not the same great temple they had in the days of Solomon, but it was a temple. The temple they built back, but my city is in ruins. There are no walls. The walls are weak and they've been broken and they're knocked over. There's no way to protect the city. And the gates have been burned. And just how terrible it was. And he said, would you let me go back and rebuild those walls and to rebuild those gates? And Artaxerxes, he respected and loved, apparently, Nehemiah. And he says, yes, you go back. And as he's leaving, Nehemiah says, oh, and I was also wondering, could you provide the resources so that we can build those walls and those gates? And the king said, okay, I can do that too. Excuse me. So he goes back to Jerusalem to rebuild that city. And in Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 17 and 18, incidentally, you can read much of this story, obviously a true account. You can read it in Nehemiah, and you can read a very similar account in the book of Ezra. The two were there at the same time. And so in Nehemiah, he says, I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned. He says to the people of Jerusalem, come, let's rebuild Jerusalem's wall so that we will no longer be a disgrace. I told them how the gracious hand of my God had been on me and what the king had said to me. And he is rallying the troops. He is giving the pep talk. He is giving the sermon. He's giving the lesson, whatever it is you want to say. He is saying, we can do this. God is on our side, the king is on our side, and our city needs to come back to the glory it was in before. They had built, as I said, they had built the temple, and there are various reasons maybe why they hadn't built the rest. Some were political reasons. But can you imagine what it must have looked like? Just a city that looks like it's been run over. Any wild animal that decides can go in. Any thief can go in. But there were those who had decided that it was silly to build back the walls. And so some had doubted Nehemiah, but Nehemiah just didn't listen to the criticism and said, we're going forward. And Nehemiah did it. But there were these men with interesting names like Sanballat and Tobiah and Garam that came to him and made fun of the people when they decided they wanted to work, and they would try to debate with Nehemiah and say, you can't do what you think you can do. And Nehemiah would say, well, and just keep working. And the men would keep working and do what they needed to do. But it wasn't just Nehemiah working, was it? The people took responsibility for what needed to be done. It was not just Nehemiah's city, it was their city, and in a sense it was the city of God. It was more important than anything else they could do in their lives was to rebuild this city where the temple was, and rebuild so that God would be praised and the people would be protected. Now this is what's hard for me to imagine, but it's the truth. The people had ignored the broken walls for 90 years. 90 years. You know what it's like? After a while, you don't even notice a problem, right? Your company notices the problem whenever they walk in the door, but you don't even notice that hole that's in the ceiling anymore, right? Sometimes I'll have my shoes out in the middle of the floor, and I just walk right by them, and Barbara says, you need to pick up your shoes. I say, what shoes? I don't even know they're there. I've been walking past them every day and don't even see them, right? That's the way it works. That's apparently what's happening partially in the city of Jerusalem. Like I say, there were other reasons too, but somehow everyone got used to it. The next generation will take care of the walls. And then the next generation said, the next generation will take care of the walls. And so on, and so on, and so on. And finally, Nehemiah says, that can't be. We have got to do something about this issue. So the people get excited and they all decide, hey, I can do a part of the wall. I can't do all the wall, but I can do a part of the wall. And I want you to see there is a long list in the book of Nehemiah in chapter 3, but I want you to see just a little piece. This is just zooming in just a little bit to see some of the people that worked on the wall. In verse 9, next to them, Raphiah, son of Hur, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs. After them, Jediah, son of Haramath, made repairs across from his house. Next to him, Hattush, the son of Hashbaniah, made repairs. Malchijah, son of Haram, and Hashab, son of Pahath, Moab, made repairs to another section, as well as to the towers of the ovens. Beside him, Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs, he and his daughters. Now, I want you to see, wow, that's a lot of names, and those are hard words in whatever language. It would have been hard for Hebrew mothers to yell at their children, don't you think, with these names? But what's important for us to see is, first of all, God gave credit. He gives written credit in His book to all the people who helped to build the walls to the city. He said, I want you to know who they were. Now, He doesn't mention the ones that don't, except for a few like Sanballat and Tobiah, but He says, I want you to see who they were that did that. He also shows us something that's very unusual for the day that they were living in. This was not just a project for the strong men to go build the walls. I have to think it would have been extremely unusual for women to be doing, in that era, heavy manual labor like it would take to move rocks and to build these types of walls that were there. Yet, do you notice how this passage ends? That Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs, and it emphasizes he and his daughters. Everyone is involved in the project. Everyone takes ownership of what's happening. We need to do that together, they say. Now, I also want you to understand this. This is a 90-year-old problem. The walls were completed in 52 days. Have you ever had an issue in your life, maybe something that bothered you? Maybe it was a physical issue, or maybe it was an emotional issue, or whatever it might have been, financial maybe, spiritual issue. I mean, just drove you crazy, and something you just couldn't shake. And finally you decided to go to the doctor, or you decided to read the Bible or go to church, whatever it was. And in just a matter of minutes or hours or days, that problem that had bothered you for years completely goes away. And you're going, why didn't I do this before? I can't believe it. Wow, I feel so much better. I never dreamed I could feel this good. The walls of Jerusalem for 90 years lie in ruins, with the fear when they go into their houses at night that someone will come and steal from them, take their animals, whatever it may be, even take their own lives. In less than 2 months, the problem was solved. Wow. But everyone had to work together to fix the problem. This week, Barbara, as I was telling her about this, reminded me of this next picture we're going to see about the importance of working together, which produces protection and progress. Now, some of you are going, I have no idea what that is. It looks like cake batter to me that's put in the water. You might have seen this before. What this is a group of ants. It's called an ant bridge. And so whenever we have a flood, or if we have a hurricane, often what you'll see where the water's high is you will sometimes see these ants floating along together. They have hooked their little arms together, and they all somehow stay together until they float to a new home. But they find a way to stick together. There is something important about working together that makes everything else better. Now, I may be the smartest person in the room. I may have the most talent in the room. Whatever it is, maybe the most athletic. But when we work together, one basketball player cannot win a game against 5 other players. One football player cannot win a game against 11 other football players. It just doesn't work that way. When we all work together and everyone contributes, then incredible things happen. Obviously, we've been talking about the building project in the last few months. That's one of those things that obviously makes sense. But it's also about our faith, and it's also about the way we deal with issues, and it's about ministries we do. One person can't do a ministry all by themselves. It's everybody working together. And when everybody's together, it is incredible what happens. So in 52 days, they build the walls. And he said, well, what happened to those walls? Weren't they destroyed whenever Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70? Yes. But I want you to understand this. They lasted 600 years. Is that not incredible? Now, there is a religious group, I don't give names, there's a group that probably some of us would have some negative feelings toward, that build their buildings to last 1,000 years. They put in the best materials they know, even though they're expensive, to last 1,000 years because they plan on being here in 1,000 years. Wow. Sometimes we're thinking, how can we get it as cheap as we can get it, right? And then we wonder why we have problems sometimes, or quickly rather than later. 600 years. And still, even today, what is known as the Wailing Wall, the last wall that's left, is there in Jerusalem. What an incredible feat of work those people did when they all devoted themselves to God and worked together and put God first and said, I'll chip in and I'll help and do my part. It is incredible what happened to save the city of Jerusalem, not for themselves, but for the next generation and the next and the next and the next for 600 years. So this is my question for us today. What will I allow God to do through me? This is really a 2-part question, and this part is not on the screen, but it's what will I allow God to do through us? Because if I'm not part of it, then us doesn't happen, right? If I'm not a part of it, then us becomes them instead of us. So whatever that is, if we're talking about building, if we're talking about ministry, about helping others, about worship, all of those things is about us working together, praising God together, of being a part of ministry and devotion and sacrifice and work together, and putting God first in all of those things. This morning, I know that there are people who are thinking, because you have been studying the Bible with others in this congregation, and you're going, boy, I'm right there on the brink, and I'm ready to be baptized into Jesus. I know, I have faith in Him, and I'm ready to do that. And sometimes people are baptized privately. That is fine. But you may be ready to do it this morning. Your faith is in Him. You're sorry for where you've been. You've repented. And God will take away your sin through baptism, through your commitment to God, and in its place give you the gift of the Holy Spirit, of God living in you, and make you a part of His kingdom. You'll be a part of that. That's exactly where I want to be, right? Because if I'm not in God's kingdom, then I'm on the other side of the wall. I don't want that. I want to be with Him. Or maybe this morning you're just struggling and you need prayer. You can come forward. Some people do. That's great if you do. We'll pray for you. Or you can also write to us at prayer@mcoc.org, and we will have folks praying for you as well. Come this morning as we stand and sing. I stand